Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Kansas State top 10 players heading into 2024. And Dill, you make no mistake about it. This is one of, if not the most dangerous team in the Big 12 heading into 2024. And as we were stacking these top 10 players, and this is kind of your list here, you've been putting a lot of time into Kansas State. You kind of understand what makes Kansas State so special is that they're just a complete roster. I mean, you look top to bottom, there are not many holes in this roster heading into 2024. And you take a look at a lot of other teams across the country with the transfer portal playing a role that it does. A lot of teams can't say that. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And it truly has been a blast taking deep dives into all of these programs. The amount of support y'all continue to show to the fellas truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let Dill have it in the comments section. If he's sleeping on some players, leaving some players off the top 10 list, let it have it. We always learn a ton from you guys in the comments section. And Dill, without further ado, number 10 on the list, Uso, a guy that he's not going to light up the stat sheet in terms of tackles for a loss and sacks, but you talk about an integral part in this Kansas State defense that does the dirty work. You're looking at him right here.
And I think he's so crucial to Kansas State because you look at everywhere else on the defensive line, they play kind of small. You think guys like Brennan Mott, Khalid Duke from last year, that's kind of the type of defensive end they've typically been targeting. So smaller guys, athletic, can get in the backfield and make some plays. But you still need, when you're going to play that way, a guy in the middle who's going to stand tall, be able to stand up blocks, eat up blocks, and let everyone else play free. I also think he's got a little bit more explosiveness to his game than just that traditional nose tackle. I think he does do a decent job in the pass rush, pushing pockets, does do a decent job of getting off blocks. So I think a very underrated, complete defensive tackle who, again, isn't going to get the numbers just given what his role is on this team. But I think he would be able to potentially do it in certain situations, and I think does.
And especially when Kansas State goes to that three-man front where you're relying on your linebackers to play clean and downhill. Again, you're not asking for a guy like Uso to get behind the line of scrimmage and make plays. You are asking him to eat up double teams and let the linebackers come downhill and make those plays. A guy that's not going to get a ton of chatter on the broadcast or in the preseason type conversations, but a guy that, again, Kansas State fans know extremely important to the Kansas State defense. Going to number 9, Austin Moore at the linebacker spot. Dill, we just talked about Uso, and I love that these two are stacked right on top of each other. Austin Moore's average depth of tackle in the run game was 1.5 yards down the field. Now, what does that tell you about Austin Moore's game? Is he is firing downhill, making his plays at or behind the line of scrimmage. I think a large part has to do with Uso in front of him, kind of eating up those blocks. But Austin Moore, I love how he attacks the line of scrimmage, finds the football repeatedly. One of those linebackers that just gets how to work through traffic and find ball carriers.
Yeah, and obviously not a freak athlete at that linebacker spot. Probably not going to be a super high NFL draft pick, but just a guy who's now been for the last handful of years so steady in this defense, so productive. And I think you look adding guys like Jay Clifton into the mix, I think is going to be huge because he does have a little bit more of that playmaking ability. I felt like when I was watching that Texas game, I'm like, all right, he keeps flashing. But again, at the end of the day, Austin Moore has been that guy who just game in and game out gets his 8+ tackles a game, it feels like, and just rinse, repeat, does it. And maybe not quite the playmaker you'd want him to be at times, but really effective.
Yeah, but you need those guys. I mean, there are so many college football programs that don't have linebackers that are routinely fit in the run consistently. I mean, Austin Moore's a guy, again, not going to be a top 100 NFL draft pick, but a guy that is very valuable to this Kansas State defense. Going to number 8, let's talk about a newcomer and Dylan Edwards. I am fired up about this kid in this Kansas State offense. And I get you lose Coach Klein. They're still going to involve your running backs in the passing attack. I don't know if you'd rather have a running back over Dylan Edwards to come and kind of fit into this Kansas State offense. And I'm not going to say it yet, but Deuce Vaughn, he kind of just gives you some of the glimpses of what he can do in space.
And you're just so excited about seeing what they can do with him. I mean, obviously you have Giddens, and Giddens is a great all-down, all-purpose, let's say, running back. I really want to see them kind of work some interesting things. And then we've talked about it. Kansas State's been a team that's not afraid to kind of do some things different, go back to the option, do some of the other things that, again, a lot of teams kind of are afraid to do at times. I think him Avery Johnson and Giddens can be a real dynamic weapon.
Need a 2 running back set with Dylan Edwards and DJ Giddens. Like that, you talk about, and one of the things that I just love about Coach Klein and his Kansas State staff is they know how to get their playmakers involved. And that's something you see so many coaches struggle to do, right? Whether it's Ben Sinnott, whether it's DJ Giddens, whether it's Deuce Vaughn, you look at those guys, they were the playmakers, and they just figured out so many unique opportunities to let them impact the offense. Dylan Edwards is one of those guys that I don't care how you do it, get this kid the football in space and good things are going to happen.
Comfortable that, again, even though you're losing Colin Klein, obviously, to Texas A&M, I think you just kind of watch what Kansas State's been about. Even going back to the Bill Snyder days, it's always kind of been the program has been bigger than the coaches, it feels like. That's kind of what I feel like they would promote from within for that position, guys who I think are going to, again, push the boundary, be a little bit more creative than certain teams. And I think that's going to be a huge part about Dylan Edwards kind of finding a big role in this Kansas State offense.
100% agree. Number 7, Jacob Parrish. Still, even when you lose Will Lee, Kobe Savage, I kind of like this Kansas State secondary in 2024.
I love the Kansas State secondary. I think Kobe Savage, I don't think had quite the year that I think some people say. Again, that free safety role, I don't necessarily know that was his best attribute, if you will. I think this is a big year, though, for Jacob Parrish. Sticking on him for a second, I think you kind of want to see – I think as a true freshman, you were really, really excited about what he did in 2022. I thought that secondary as a unit maybe played even a little bit better at times. I think Jacob Parrish, you kind of go to that film – solid in 2023. It's not like he was bad or anything, but I think he wasn't quite that, like almost like that high impact draft pick kind of guy. I think that he has that in his game, super versatile, plays on that boundary corner, but really does a good job tackling. I think can play that nickel, can play in more of that zone scheme. I think a super versatile player. I just think you want to see a little bit of a better year this year then.
100%. Going to number 6, another one of your guys, Hadley Panzer on the offensive line. Dill, Kansas State's got a little bit of a pipeline going. Like, they don't necessarily land these top 50 national recruits out of high school, but every time you start digging into Kansas State, it's like good offensive line. They got some dogs up there. You lose Cooper Beebe, one of my favorite all-time college football players on the offensive line. I mean, they got some guys like Hadley Panzer where you look at this Kansas State offensive line and once again are saying probably one of the better units in the Big 12 heading into 2024.
They're obviously going to turn it over a little bit, but you have that one stud back. I think a guy who does a really good job opening up holes in the running game, moving guys off the line of scrimmage, which again is something so important to what Kansas State's like to do, especially as they've kind of led through that rushing attack and let play action work off it. So again, to be able to have him back, I think is huge. I think he's going to be their best offensive lineman. And then you kind of look at who's going to surround him. I think you kind of said it right. Kansas State's just been a team that's done an incredible job developing offensive linemen.
Yeah, and quick disclaimer on the slides here, Dill, a little sloppy out of me. 296 rushing yards with 5.7 yards per attempt, former top 100 recruit. That is going to be a different football player that we're going to be talking about in a little bit. Hadley Panzer, though, that first line's right. 1 sack, 11 quarterback hurries. Damn good numbers from an offensive lineman that's returning to this unit. Going to number 5, and let's talk about a true freshman in Jace Brown, who we cover the recruiting trail quite extensively. Jace Brown just flew under the radar, and I kind of dove into what this kid was like coming out of high school. 1, parents were phenomenal athletes. Number 2, multi-sport athlete. Kansas State's been looking for some wide receivers to give them some juice. Right, you look at where that passing attack kind of went through tight ends, running backs. I think Jace Brown has the opportunity to be that wide receiver 1 for Kansas State over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think you can open this offense up a little bit when you bring in Avery Johnson to run it, where last year it felt like everything kind of had to go underneath. It's not like Will Howard. Yeah. Will Howard's obviously a solid player, but didn't really have that upside to push the ball as effectively. I think Avery Johnson, you look, going to open things up with his legs for sure. That's probably what he leads with to an extent. But, I mean, he can get the ball down the field. I thought in that bowl game, Jace Brown had a couple of nice plays where you want to see him be able to go get up and catch the ball in traffic, if you will, or make some of those plays in the air. Because you always knew he had that ability to run after the catch, make guys miss. That was very obvious, I felt like, through most of the year. And then you got to see him make some of those contested plays in the bowl game. I think that's what you're like looking for.
Well, that's the crazy part is this kid barely touched the field his first couple of games of his Kansas State career, and then all of a sudden just comes on as that difference maker in the Kansas State wide receiver room where again, not a shot at a guy like Phillip Brooks, but wasn't really that true difference maker, X wide receiver. Jace Brown can be that guy. And that was something that Kansas State was sorely missing in the 2023 season. Going to number 4, Marquise Sigle. Dill, this was the one player that I took your top 10 list, and I was like, no, we gotta move this kid up. Originally, I don't even know if you had him in your top 10. I pushed back hard. Another one of those, I think, difference makers in the back end for Kansas State. Kind of plays that nickel role. Led the team in tackles and pass breakups. And you look at like all the different kind of offenses that you're going to see in the Big 12. You got to have a guy, if you're going to play that nickel role, that can be really sticky in coverage, but also can give you that run support. I think Marquise Sigle certainly can do that. A 48% completion percentage when targeted, extremely good numbers. Sign me up for this kid heading into 2024.
You obviously watch how Kansas State likes to play defense. I mean, they ask a lot out of their guys like Marquise Sigle and their safety to be able to play a little bit of man coverage, play zone, play free safety or deep safety, I should say. And a guy who I think you kind of touched that, just ultra versatile, makes plays wherever he is on the field, and is a huge part of what Kansas State's doing.
And another thing, if you are going to run that 3-man defensive line, not only your linebackers, but your defensive backs need to fire downhill and make plays. Marquise Sigle led this team in tackles last year. He certainly does that for this Kansas State defense. Going to number 3, and Dill, I was just where do you put this kid? I think you talk about mid-October where Avery Johnson comes in for Kansas State. I think there's a very good shot that he's the best player on this Kansas State team. Threw him in at number 3, just kind of giving the youngster a little bit of something to prove heading into 2024. But this is just a difference maker at quarterback that I would note. Ohio State took the guy that Avery Johnson squeezed out of the program. And I think that tells you something about Will Howard being a really good football player, but also Avery Johnson being someone special for Kansas State to build around for the next couple of years.
And honestly, you go back in the history of Kansas State, I don't think they've had a quarterback like this since arguably Colin Klein. And I think he does have a little bit more throwing upside than what Colin Klein had. So I think you kind of look, Kansas State's always been so consistent, so good. It's really exciting when you kind of get that almost that like cornerstone guy at that quarterback spot that's really hard to land unless you're me, like Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, the teams that do it every year. Those teams, I guess, have, but like when you're at Kansas State and you almost feel like you're a Heisman player away from being as competitive as any of those schools, I think that's super exciting.
Dill, as Michigan fans, kind of reminds me of J.J. McCarthy. Like very, very similar. Like you had an experienced quarterback that you won a lot of football with in Cade McNamara in Michigan's case. You got this youngster, J.J. McCarthy, coming in, and you just kind of knew, even though he didn't start really as a true freshman, but you saw him play a lot, you kind of knew that's the guy. I'm not saying Kansas State's going to go win a national championship, but this guy puts some – I think if Avery Johnson kind of is as good as we think he's going to be, I think he takes him to that next tier in the landscape of college football. I am just so fired up about this kid, and it's really hard not to root for a guy like Avery Johnson. Fired up for Avery Johnson going into our number 2 player, running back DJ Giddens. I love not only DJ Giddens as a football player, but more importantly, how he balances out Dylan Edwards. You got Dylan Edwards, who's a guy that you're probably not going to use between the tackles that much, but get him out in space. You got DJ Giddens, who's just an absolute hammer, man. Like this kid just gets downhill, 69 missed tackles for 727 yards after contact. He's a box checker at the running back spot. He's a workhorse at the running back spot. One of the best backs, not only in the Big 12, but in the country for me heading into 2024.
You said it. Maybe not like some of those eye-popping athletic traits or some of those eye-popping explosive numbers, but just a guy who down in and down out does what he's supposed to do, keeps this team on schedule. And I think you're right. That's the really exciting kind of thing for this Kansas State team is how him and Dylan Edwards ultimately work together, because there is not probably a better back in the Big 12, I should say, than DJ Giddens, just down to down. And then you obviously have Avery Johnson, who can really run it at a high level, and then you have Dylan Edwards. You gotta hope they do something crazy, like just something crazy with this.
There's so many different ways that this offense can attack opposing defenses. And you mentioned something that I think is really important. DJ Giddens keeping him on schedule. You have a young quarterback in Avery Johnson. This team is going to be elite on converting third downs if you can stay into those 3rd and 3, 3rd and 2 situations. Keep Avery Johnson in those quarterback-friendly down and distances. what better back to do that with than DJ Giddens? I mean, he's turning 2nd and 8s into 2nd and 6s. He's turning 3rd and 5s into 3rd and 3s. This is a guy that is a hammer. He falls forward. Yeah, y'all can tell that DJ Giddens makes me feel some type of way. Going to our number 1 player, Dill. I think this is just your guy, BJ Payne. I'll give you the T-box.
Yeah, and I think this is the guy who should have been free safety Avery. I think just his range, his ability to go sideline to sideline and make plays in that passing game, I think is going to be huge for Kansas State. I did think that was one thing they kind of missed on it. Just Kobe Savage didn't have the range that VJ Payne did. VJ Payne also, obviously, you see the 57 tackles, will come up, make plays in the run, does a good job of like what you said, where it's coming downhill rather than catching guys 15 yards down the field. So all those kind of things, really unique athlete with that length, that range. I'm really excited to see what he can do. And
I think sorry to interrupt. That's $1 to the jar. Now, we got a jar for the times I interrupted.
I kind of came in late, but I love the athletic profile you have of him. I think he's one of the better players in the country.
I'm literally going to go broke. I don't have that much money to begin with. Now, VJ Payne for me, I think, and it's kind of crazy to say because Avery Johnson's certainly a guy. I think he has probably the highest draft ceiling that you're talking about. This is a physical freak show, I think, for Kansas State. I think he's a little high to be once. I think he still needs to put it together a little bit. But when you get another one of those conversations, we're talking about mid-October, we might be talking about one of the better defensive backs, not only in the Big 12, but in the country, kind of your guy heading into 2024. That'll do it for the boys. Kansas State top 10 players. And again, Dill, this team is complete. It's deep. And I think most importantly, the culture, it's in a really good spot heading into the 2024.
They got the quarterback that if everything comes together around it, they can legit win.
Yeah, I think that's what's most exciting. I just kind of came up with the JJ McCarthy comp on the spot. I kind of dig it. I think I'm going to continue to use that. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.